So we have a great guest speaker, faculty member, Dr. Rambo. I'm going to let her introduce herself and get into our topic for the evening. This session will be recorded and we will be adding it to the Canva course by early next week. And again, this is part of our telehealth case competition, but relevant for all students who have an interest in healthcare and family therapy onwards. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our guest speaker and get into our topic for the night.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Dr. Ann Rambo, and I'm on the faculty of the Family Therapy Program, which is also part of the KPCOM, the College of Osteopathic Medicine. And the reason that it's also part of that is that family therapy working is all about how people communicate with each other, and working with couples, families, groups, systems is an integral part of healthcare these days. So my kind of healthcare might look a little bit different from a pediatrician's or a dentist, but it's still healthcare, and it's still an important part of how people stay healthy and recover from illness. I have much experience working with couples and families. I also work a lot with at-risk youth, and I'm a consultant to the school district. I'm going to talk about those experiences, but how those then apply to medicine. And I have a case example of a physician using those same ideas to communicate differently with patients. And as I go, I'm going to talk about communication in general, good communication in general, what to keep in mind, particularly in a healthcare context, when you're trying to use persuasive communication to get people to change their habits, to change their lives, to increase their wellness. And then I'm going to talk about what's different and what's the same with teletherapy. What do we need to work a little bit harder on in teletherapy? And what are the advantages of teletherapy? So as I go along, please speak up if you have a question. I'll answer some questions at the end as well, or put something in the chat if you're shy. Because like I say, I'll be covering a lot of ground. So I want to make sure that you're understanding what I'm saying. Okay, my base is in narrative and solution-focused therapy, which are evidence-based, strengths-focused models of therapy, which were created within the family therapy field. They are widely used in medical settings. And I'm going to be talking about that, and again, talking about the specific applications to teletherapy. Key takeaways from everything I'm going to be saying. Negatives linger, but positive is influence. People pay much more attention to negative communication, but it is the positive communication that allows us to stay in relationship with each other, and therefore influences behavior. The absence of a positive is a negative. Most of the time, human beings scan for threats in their relationships. So if they're not seeing you as positive, they're not seeing you as neutral either. They're seeing you as negative, as a potential threat. And that's important to keep in mind. The best compliment is the one you give yourself. So that means that instead of just telling people, good job, keep it up, if we can help people, if we can ask questions that cause others to see for themselves that they did something right and they're pleased with themselves, and they started a new habit that they want to continue, that's going to be much more effective. Those are key healthcare communication skills, and some of them you're going to have to try a little bit harder with in teletherapy. So let's start with the positive versus negative. If you were walking along and you saw this beautiful field of flowers and a tiger jumped out at you from behind a bush, would you stop and smell the flowers? Anybody? Thumbs up if you would, thumbs down if you wouldn't.
I would not.
You would probably not. Probably most people would not. And the reason for that is it would be dangerous. And also negative. We are hardwired to pay attention to negative stimuli more than the positive. Let's look at what that looks like in relationships. Imagine a husband and wife about to go out to dinner. And as they're standing by the door, ready to go out in these perilous times, maybe outdoor, we'll assume, and they're wearing masks, he says to her, darling, you look great in that dress. Red is really your color. I'm so glad we're getting to spend this time together. And I just wish I didn't get so bored when I have to be alone with you. Now, if we were a computer, we might say, okay, that was 3 positive comments out of 4. So this guy is right at 75%, right? So he's doing okay in this relationship. But actually, because we're human beings, we know that is not the case, not unless he's married to a computer, because human beings do not receive positive and negative messages equally. We give a lot more of our attention and memory to negative messages. One of the best known marital researchers in our field, John Gottman, has found that spouses have to give each other 5 positive messages for every 1 negative message just to be perceived as neutral. Not as warm and fuzzy, not as loving and caring, not as supportive, just as neutral, not actually an enemy. Because that's how much more attention we pay to the negative comments. If you think about your relationships, I think you will be able to see that we hold in our memories a long time, everything that somebody said that hurt us. We hold those in our memories a long time, and we have a hard time letting go of those. And we have a great tendency to kind of brush off compliments and positives. We don't pay as much attention to those. Why is that? Why are negative messages so much more salient? Well, think about the flower and the tiger. Throughout human history, people who don't prioritize negative messages are in danger. If you were sitting down and smelling the flowers instead of paying attention to the tiger, that wouldn't be such a good idea. Or a more 21st century big city type of danger, if you're paying attention to that stranger's smile and not noticing that he's holding a knife, you're also in danger. If you're not wary, you are in danger, because we live in a dangerous world. So Gottman states that humans are hardwired to respond to negative stimuli more deeply and more quickly. In fact, we're constantly scanning for threats, or the possibility that somebody else is going to hurt us, is a danger to us, is a negative person in our life. Negative messages swiftly activate the amygdala, that part of our brain that's not very responsive to control by the cerebral cortex. And that triggers an immediate fight, flight, or freeze, we should actually say, response, and that easily overwhelms our ability to process logically. What happens to couples? Let's look at them, because that's our most intense person-to-person relationship. What happens to couples if you go below that 5-to-1 ratio? If in fact you're not giving 5 positive messages for every 1 negative message, what happens is the other person starts to feel attacked. And when they start to feel attacked, what do, right? What do people do when they feel attacked? They start to attack in turn. They start to say negative things. And then the first person feels even more attacked and is even more negative. And they do what Gottman calls going over the negative waterfall. They become almost exclusively negative and hostile with each other, and even their memories become negative. Gottman has John and Julie Gottman, who work together, have wonderful videotapes of couples taken each. They do longitudinal research, starting with a couple in the first year of their marriage, all the way through to the end of their marriage, whenever that happens, 50 years later or 5 years later or whatever. And they videotape them every single year talking to each other. And it is fascinating and frightening to see what happens when people go over the negative waterfall. Because you, watching these videos, you're there in real time, right? So you just saw the video from their first year of marriage. And now you're hearing them in their 5th year of marriage. And one of them is saying, I always knew it was a mistake. The other one is saying, I never enjoyed being with this person. I've always knew there was something wrong. And you're thinking, no, you didn't, because I just saw that video 3 minutes ago from your first year of marriage when you guys really liked each other. But they don't even remember that anymore, because all of their memories have become tainted by negativity too. It's a frightening thing to watch, to see how people can turn on each other, even in the closest of relationships. That, by the way, and this is just a little public service announcement, that's why marital therapists need special training. That's why in the state of Florida, graduates of mental health counseling programs or social work programs are not allowed to see couples like graduates of our family therapy program are, because those are special considerations. If you were to be seeing two casually friendly roommates that were selected by random selection, and they're having an argument over who's going to take out the trash, whose turn it is to take out the trash, you could probably sit down with them and draw up a simple chore chart and get them to agree. If you try that with a committed romantic couple, you're probably going to make things worse. Even if they come in saying they're fighting about who's going to take out the trash, because what they're really fighting about is that they both feel rejected. And you're going to have to do some repair and some soothing and get that amygdala to settle down and get people to be in a place where they can once again logically process and not be so afraid of being hurt before they can actually talk with each other and resolve a simple issue like taking out the trash. So a skillful marital therapist starts with repair and not problem solving. That doesn't just apply to couples, even though it's maybe more strong with couples. It's important to keep in mind with my own work with at-risk youth. If I go in like a guidance counselor might, say the child was suspended, the teenager was suspended for smelling like marijuana. Don't you realize by showing up to school smelling like marijuana, you're risking your future? I'm likely to get a stonewalled response, but it's legal in Colorado. I hear that a lot. Why am I getting that stonewalled response? Because I'm perceived now as a threatening adult, as just another person who doesn't understand. But if I go in asking about the young person's goals and dreams, oh, so you play on the football team? What's your position? Are you thinking about a football scholarship? What does your coach say? What do your teammates say? Then I've established myself as a friendly, interested person who is interested in what this teenager actually has to say and interested in the teenager's interests. And then the young person himself is likely to come out with something like, I did this really stupid thing that could have risked all that. I don't want to do that again. Help me figure out how not to do that. You have to establish yourself as a non-threatening person first, or you're just going to trigger that stonewall response. You may be thinking that doesn't have anything to do with medical settings, but think again about that, because most people are very scared of going to the doctor. Virtually everyone is terrified of going to the dentist, of course. Those are scary situations for people. They're afraid of what they might hear. They're afraid that they're going to get scolded because they didn't take their medicine, or they didn't lose weight, or they didn't exercise, they didn't do what they were supposed to. Most people walk into medical settings very much scanning for threats, very much on guard. So it is important to establish yourself as a friendly person, a safe person, a positive person, so that the other person literally can hear you. Most people do not take their medication as prescribed. Well over 90% of patients, medical patients, do not take their medication as prescribed. And why is that? The reason for that is that they were defensive by the time that information was given. They were afraid of being at the doctor. The doctor said that to them in a way that sounded to them almost aggressive, or like the doctor thought wasn't listening to them. The doctor said, you have to take this medicine at lunch, at meal times. And the person complied outwardly, but inwardly they thought, no, I don't have to take it at meal times. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. They were already in that kind of defensive posture, right? Their amygdala was a little bit stimulated there, right? And if the doctor had phrased it another way, if the physician had said, many people report that they get a little nauseated with this medicine, but it seems to help if they take it at mealtime. Let me know what you think about that, or what you find out. Then the odds are very good that person would take that medicine with meals. So yes, it does apply to medical contexts as well. So what about in teletherapy? In teletherapy, you're going to have to try a little bit harder to communicate the positive. The situation feels a little bit stranger. You're not there in person with the other person. So you need to slow down, smile, take a minute to introduce yourself, and start with some positive, non-threatening remarks. In terms of the way media is perceived in the human brain, in person is warm. In person is more intimate. On screen is cool. It's a little more distanced. And that means cool means you have to work a bit harder to seem positive and friendly. But there are also some advantages in person. That closeness can be triggering and can make you and can distract you from what the other person is actually saying. So people may actually remember your questions more and remember what you said more when you're talking to them from a distance online on screen. But you have to break through that screen enough to capture their interest and enough for them to see you as a positive, friendly, engaging person. So, and you'll have to work a little bit harder with that in teletherapy. So let's talk about what questions you could ask. That would be useful. And let's move our discussion to a medical context. So you know that I'm talking about your field as well. I'm going to present a case study that uses both narrative and solution-focused therapy. You're probably not too interested in those differences because that's not your field, but should you become interested in exploring my field one day, both focus on what's working and what's hopeful, and both work with the client's own goals. But narrative adds an additional focus on the larger social political context, deconstructing ideas in the dominant discourse that may hold the person back. Ideas that we've all absorbed, classist, racist, sexist ideas that we've all absorbed from the larger context. Solution focus stays a little more focused on the goal alone, and they add a lot of focus on scaling. So let's talk about this case. If you want to look it up, this is, it was published in the Journal of Family Medicine, and the authors are Shapiro and Ross. It's the applications of narrative therapy, but also solution-focused therapy, to the practice of family medicine. And it focused on a case involving a young female doctor, young female physician, and her patient was a midlife to older midlife, high-achieving male patient. He was the CEO of his own business. He was very high-powered, aggressive, achieving, and things were not going well between them. He had adult onset type 2 diabetes. He was not compliant at all with diabetes instructions or with the diet given to him by his doctor. And his diabetes just kept on getting worse. Not only that, but the physician, I wasn't really ready to move on. The physician really didn't like meeting with him. She felt disrespected by him, and like he was never listening to her and disregarded her. He didn't like meeting with her either. He didn't keep about half of his appointments. And that was a part of his non-compliance, which again was making his blood sugar levels worse and worse. In most medical schools now, there's a behavioral health specialist who is not a physician, who is quite frequently a family therapist, who works with physicians about different ways to communicate and different ways to be with people. And this physician called in the behavioral health specialist in her medical school. And this is what she was recommended to do. She was first asked to switch to asking questions rather than just telling him things, to ask him questions about how he understood his illness. Deconstructive questions. He frequently said, real men don't fuss around with their health, or this is, I can't do this kind of thing. So she asked, how did you first learn that real men don't fuss with their health? Where does that idea come from? She used renaming, externalizing questions. So what would you call this problem of your blood sugar getting higher and higher? Instead of just calling it diabetes, what does he call it? Some people call it the blood sugar. Some people call it the sugar. What do you call it? And what does that mean in your life? And those are essentially narrative therapy meaning questions. But the physician went on to solution-focused questions that focused on the patient's strengths and the patient's own terms. And that included some questions like, let's say this actually happened. The patient came in and said that he had not been compliant with the diet. He had been eating sweets and starches and all kinds of things all week. But there was a time, he did mention offhand, that he had been to a company dinner and they always had a lot of desserts there, and he skipped dessert there. That was that one time. So the physician zeroed in on that. What does it say about you that you were able to resist dessert at that company dinner? Was there a moment last week, because he was saying, I just don't care about this, when you felt in control of the not caring? Was that time last week, that time when you actually skipped the desserts that you really wanted to eat? Was that on the side of deciding to care or on the side of not caring? And some questions about relationship. Who in your life will be least surprised when you're able to conquer the not caring? And there was a lot of evidence-based complimenting, which is a very strong skill, very useful in healthcare contexts. Most of the time when we compliment people or when we think we're complimenting people, we say to them, that's good, great job, you did that well. The trouble with that is that can come across as fairly patronizing. And people don't really hear that the way we want them to hear. A more powerful way of complimenting is to get curious about the person's positives and get very interested in them. So that's really interesting. You were able to skip dessert at that company banquet. How were you able to do that? Did you use some of those leadership skills that you also use as a CEO? What did you say to people? How did you manage to explain? When you ask a lot of questions and pay a lot of attention, eventually the person themselves says, well, I've always been a leader instead of a follower. Well, I made the decision to put my health first. And then what are they doing? They're complimenting themselves. And that's much more powerful and much more something that they will remember. That's such a great skill that if we have time, we'll even try that out in breakout rooms today. So what happened with this? The patient became compliant and greatly reduced his symptoms and was able to come off medication altogether. But also, the physician started liking the patient and being glad when he was going to come in. Their relationship greatly improved. And the patient started making every single visit with the physician and wanting to come in even more often. So you can see there was a real turnaround just in the way that they were communicating with each other. This was a very detailed and specific case study, but it's still just one study. However, it led to some large-scale quantitative studies. So I want to make sure that you know that there's evidence too, particularly for the solution focus, asking about what worked, asking about what went right, getting details about it, allowing the person to realize their own strengths and compliment themselves. That increased hope and increased positive relationships with medical professionals and increased compliance. And they looked at many cases across the field, pediatricians working with childhood obesity, nurses working with obesity prevention, and primary care physicians working with obesity and obesity prevention. And that's relevant because obesity is actually one of the most resistant, those are some of the most resistant patients. So that really lets us know that this different way of talking to people and asking questions of people can be useful. So how might you use such an approach with your patients once you enter upon a medical field? You could refocus on positives, on what's been accomplished, on what went well rather than on what went wrong. You could offer plenty of interest, curious questions, and admiring comments regarding what went well. That works better than the good job type of praise. Ask questions about what they did right, try to find out more, get interested in what went right for them this week. And that's what we call evidence-based complimenting. This use of positives will build a relationship, avoid triggering those defensive fight or flight responses, and increase the likelihood of compliance and teamwork. And compliance and teamwork are what help you do well. When you work with patients. When you and your patients are working together as a team, you're doing much better work. So how does that work in teletherapy? Let's go back to that. Establishing yourself as a caring and safe person becomes even more important because you're working with this more distant medium. So you need to work a little harder at building that relationship. But your questions can actually resonate more without the distraction of what's going on in the office and what's going on around people in the unfamiliar context. You can repeat questions in the chat for the patient to take home and think about. And that's a great tool to use. And again, your most effective questions are curious and about what's going right rather than about what's going wrong. Letting the person see that your questions are also about letting the person see his or her, their own strengths, which is far more effective than simple praise. Okay, I have a little breakout room activity, but first I have been talking a lot. And I know if you're like my graduate students, you have a lot of questions. So please ask me some questions. Ask for examples. Tell me anything that you're not clear about in everything that I said. Come on, guys, you get much more out of it if you actually ask questions. Nobody? Okay, so I'm going to make you talk to each other then with Emilio and Olivia's help. And then come back and talk to me about what you talked to each other about. Here's my breakout room. I want you to practice evidence-based complimenting. I want you to take turns asking each other about what went right this week. And when one person is doing that, the rest of you listen for and comment on, ask additional questions about what strengths that person showed. Don't stop until that person is feeling really good about himself or herself. And then rotate to the next person. And we'll try that for about 10, 15 minutes. And then I'll ask you to come back and I'll ask for someone to report from each breakout room. And think about while you're doing this, how you can convey warmth and interest right through the screen and connect with people interpersonally right through the screen.
I'm going to put everyone in the breakout rooms now.
Perfect. Okay, are they disappearing? Because they should start disappearing as they go into their breakout rooms.
Some have accepted, some have not. I'm waiting on a few that I think have their screen on, but I don't know if they're in front of their computer.
Okay.
I think that's it.
I'm gonna, since these two, I'm gonna move them to a room that does have people.
Good idea. So were we able to move those two?
Yeah, everyone that is that the only two are the ones that are stuck in here with us. Everyone else is in two breakout rooms.
Okay, okay. Yeah, they're not a group that asks a lot of questions, are they?
There's a lot of burnout this week. Next week is midterms.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of these pre-health students in other sessions. I think this week there've been a lot of late night events and I've been a part of with them too. I think there's a little bit of burnout going on this week.
Well, hopefully the breakout rooms will get them talking to each
Yeah,
other
exactly.
and be positive with each
Yeah.
other, and then they can come back and talk about that. We won't keep them too long. What'd you set it up for? Just like 10 minutes?
Yeah, I think that's enough time.
Yeah, I think that's enough time. I don't want them to go away, so I want them to just interact with each other a little bit and come back and talk, right?
I do not blame you. It's always difficult to talk and present to like a very uninteractive crowd, especially when this kind of topic's going on. But Amelia and I were actually meeting earlier today talking about how we want to grade these students like when they do the live event. I don't know if Amelia was explaining to you we've been explained to in depth, but we're doing a virtual event where they get to interact with the patient actor, which will be Amelia.
Yeah, he was telling me about that with actors. Yeah, and
Yes,
actors are going to be difficult to do stuff. Yeah, I thought that was so great.
yes.
Yeah.
We're gonna be
So-
him and I are gonna be the actors, and we were talking about how important we think it is for them to like disarm the actor or ourselves with our medical woes. So I'm excited. I don't know if they realize how important it is that they listen to this presentation, because it's going to help them so much in the event. Like if they do get to compete, because they're going to need it, and they're going to need this long after this competition, like if they want to be medical professionals. So it's so
Right.
valuable that you're telling them about this, and I find it so interesting myself. So
Oh, good. I'm glad, because sometimes you do feel like you're talking to the wall, but it is important, because people do react so much with fear, and that makes it very defensive. And then if you start asking them about why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that, then you've really lost them. But if you can talk about what's gone right for them, then it creates a whole different kind of relationship.
exactly. And I find that even career advising myself, that the times that I'm more like when I give them a compliment about kind of how they're feeling and about how their day is going, or like that event went well,
Mhm.
I find that I get a better response, and they're less angry or aggressive if I give them feedback that they're not so happy about
Yeah.
regarding their future.
Right.
So
And then you can give the other feedback once they're a little bit disarmed. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
And they'll actually hear it instead of just reacting with the defensiveness.
And we all know they can be very defensive.
Yeah. Well, people in general can, because
I know I can.
we're
Yeah.
hardwired to defend against attack, because and it makes sense.
Yeah. I when you're talking about like people not liking going to the doctors, I was imagining myself at the dentist. And I love my dentist as a person, but I never enjoyed going to the dentist, and he knows that. He's like, I'm gonna get you to really enjoy coming to visit me. And I'm like, look, it's gonna take years, but like it's working. He's breaking down those barriers. I'm like, oh, I don't mind coming to see you.
Well, that's a step.
Yeah. I was like, well, I'm still nervous. I'm defensive. I'm like, are you gonna hurt me? You're
Mhm.
gonna say something like I didn't floss enough today, and I get like anxious. So when you're talking about it, I was kind of laughing to myself.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's really true. Yeah, I teach a course in psychopathology too, which includes suicidality. It's interesting that dentists and veterinarians have the highest rates of suicide, and they think it's because they all have patients that don't want to be there, that are, and so many times are actively hostile to them. And it's hard to feel good at the end of the day when your patients all think you're awful.
Oh,
So I'm glad you're working with your dentist.
I'm gonna be extra nice to him. Oh no. Oh no.
So then this is posted on Canvas.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
all enrolled in a course for the telehealth case competition.
Uh-huh.
So once the recording is like set, we'll put it on like a module for for the competition itself, so they can review it at their own will, like whenever they have time. We also want to hopefully update it with like helpful resources for them, like how to do soap notes, for example, which is one aspect of the competition, and
Right.
like good resources that we can get. I like to post them on there because students are always looking for like a library of resources. I find that this generation is very much like, what can you give me now? I need like this instant like gratification. So we find it valuable to record these sessions so they can look back at it later, because they're a very technology focused group of students, I find.
Yeah, it's great the way you've designed the competition. It sounds really interesting and a great way to engage them.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of fun with it, I must admit. And the bigger they're getting, the more ideas we have to like make them bigger and more interesting, especially now that we're remote. So we're happy that we're able to accommodate for that as well.
And do they get a prize if they win something?
Yeah, $400 prize for this semester. Every semester we have something.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah.
They love that. I think that's why they compete. Besides, they can also earn experiential education and learning credit, which is
nice.
what they need for graduation here at NSU. So there's like that pro, but then I know some students that are done it like 4 or 5 times now, and I'm like, oh, you keep competing. They're like, I really enjoy it, but I want to win. Why am I not winning? And I'm like, you can't. I'm like, well, you've worked so hard, and I try to like reframe it, and they're like, I want to win. They're very competitive.
Well, that's good. I mean, they're learning a lot through that process. It's true. It becomes almost like a reality show, and this is the generation that grew up with that, right?
That is so true. The reality show generation. I never thought to like frame it like that.
Yeah. Well, they should be about ready to come back, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna close all the rooms.
Yeah, close all the rooms.
I'm expecting smiling faces and cameras on and being like, I feel great about myself.
I hope. I hope they didn't just all leave.
They have 1 minute.
No.
We'll be back in here.
Hey, so we're starting to come back.
Ten seconds and they'll all be closed.
Oh yeah, there's Jessie, great picture. And then Jolly. Okay, who wants to talk about how it went in their group and how you were able, or any problems that you ran into trying to do this with each other? I'm looking for volunteers, but I will call on you if all else fails.
In our group, we talked about our week. There were 3 of us in our group, and we all basically are science majors. We talked about what we wanted to be in the future, like our future career goals. I felt like we were able, even though it was over Zoom and our cameras were off, I feel like we were able to kind of get personable over Zoom. And yeah, I think
that's great. That's great. And were you able to comment on each other's strengths, to ask questions about how you were coping? And what I understand was kind of a difficult week with midterms coming up and everything.
Yeah, we talked about like a strategy we all have in common, which is having list of a to-do list for the week and cross out whatever we accomplish / finish.
Great. So you were able to establish some common ground. Good job.
Yes.
That's great. And that does help you break through the screen and actually connect with each other. Okay, another group.
And we had 2 rooms, so I think we have one more of the other group.
Yeah. So who's the other group? Who's in the other group? Jessie, Kyle, Karen, Samantha. Who's in the other group?
So we talked about like our personal things that happened. One of us had a really great fun Valentine's Day, and another a beach day, followed by some productivity. So and we were saying to each other as we listened, like oh, that sounds really nice, and I love that. It was wonderful that you had such a great time having a great Valentine's Day or a beach day, and then you were able to get some work done as well. So, and the other group, we did have our cameras off, but through our voices, we could hear like our like the positive vibes, and like we would have like gentle laughter or something like that. So
you were able to put a lot of warmth even just into voices.
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Why do you think people felt more comfortable with their cameras off? What do you think that's about? Anybody? Not just Jesse.
Possibly like since we don't really know each other that well. Also due to maybe how some people where they're sitting at right now, they didn't expect their cameras to be on, and they're in somewhere that's maybe a little bit more personal, like their bedroom or someplace that is they don't really feel comfortable showing, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So think about that with your future patients, because usually in teletherapy, you have to show yourself, and that can feel kind of scary and exposed. And what I was going for, and one of the things that the literature suggests, is that one reason why teletherapy is scary to people is usually when you're talking to somebody, you're not also looking at yourself. And that can make people very self-conscious to be looking at somebody else and talking to somebody else, and they constantly see themselves too. And we all tend to be very critical of ourselves, how we're looking, how we're gesturing, whatever. And we're not really very used to looking at ourselves. So that can be very distracting for people, and it can feel scary. So you'll even see patients who say, "Oh, well, I'll come in for therapy if I don't have to look at myself. If I can make myself, if I can be a dark screen, or if I can put a photo up there." But of course, that's usually not a good idea in healthcare, because you need to be able to see the other person. So you have to kind of work harder to make the person feel safe, that you're not judging, nobody's judging, and it's okay to look like however you look like, that it's not an evaluative context. Okay, you guys did a great job being personable with each other and focusing on the positive with each other. I didn't really hear a lot of what I mean about evidence-based complimenting. So in the little bit of time that I have left, what I'd like to do is to demonstrate that. So I need a volunteer for this. And if one of you guys will volunteer, that is great. If not, I'm happy for Emilio or Olivia to volunteer as well. I need somebody who's willing to talk about a bad day, not a terrible bad day, not a tragedy kind of day, but just a day where you couldn't find a parking place, and irritating things happened, and you were late for class, and you forgot to pack a lunch, or whatever, just an ordinary kind of bad day. Can I have a volunteer? In the interest of time, Olivia, can I ask you to be my volunteer?
Sure.
Thank you. Can you tell me just about, just start talking to me about a day that things didn't go so great?
Yeah, so one day, so as my typical advising day, I had a bunch of back-to-back 4 30-minute appointments. So it was like 1:30 to 2:30 to, it was just really hectic. And my Zoom was giving me difficulties, and appointments were arriving a little bit late. So appointments were going over. So I was feeling very stressed.
Oh yeah.
And not being able to like accomplish all my appointments and my notes like I usually do on time. So I felt by the end of the day very drained and exhausted. And that I didn't advise as well as I probably normally would have. So I took I had a little like self-blame moment there, but yeah.
Right. Because it just kept rolling over, and you're getting more and more behind. Yeah. So did you manage to see everybody?
Yes.
Yeah. How did you manage to see everybody, even though you started out running behind and with the Zoom problems?
Well, I made sure to definitely in the appointments take a lot of notes. And then I realized that if I would just message, so if it was a Zoom, I could message the waiting room and say, I'll be a few minutes with you. I won't be long. And so I was able to monitor the time. And so it wasn't too late into over the next appointment, maybe like a minute or two, but I was able to keep them like keep them engaged and then kind of move them and shift them along. And luckily no one was frustrated or angry with me for that slight delay, maybe because it was only a couple minutes. And so they didn't notice it. They were like,
Well,
oh,
because you reached out to them. How did you come up with that idea of messaging them in the waiting room?
I think I realized that a coworker of mine mentioned to me that I could go online and message them, but I thought of it immediately as soon as I saw them in the waiting room. So through experience with Zoom, I just went in and would type them a quick message. I would ask the current student I'm working with, do you mind if I take a moment to message my next appointment to make sure that they know that I'm aware that they're here? And they're like, oh yeah, no problem. So
that must take a lot of skill to stay engaged with one person and also keep that other person engaged.
Yes, it's hard, but luckily students are really forgiving. And if I ask them like for just one moment, they don't mind, especially if I've built a rapport with them in the beginning of the appointment.
So it sounds like you're really good at building rapport.
I like to give myself credit for that. Yeah. Where I do have a lot of repeat clients or students that come in and see me that trust me. So that feels good.
Okay. Thank you, Olivia. And I want to point out to you guys what I just did, because she started out talking about a bad day, a day where she actually ended up feeling negative about herself. But I asked her about one thing that she identified as being useful. And then I got really interested in that, how she managed to think of that, how she managed to do that. And I extrapolated from that to some rapport building skills that she obviously has. So now we're talking, you know, in a positive way, and we're talking about skills that she has that she can build on. That's what I mean by evidence-based complimenting. If I just said to her, oh, I'm sure you did fine, that just sounds like a pat on the head, or like maybe I wasn't really listening. But if I ask her about how she coped with that situation and what she was able to do to make it work anyway, and that gets us on to discussion of her rapport building skills. And then she's complimenting herself. Does everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up if it makes sense. I got some thumbs. That's great. Does anybody else want to volunteer to try that out? You can just tell me about a bad day. I'll try it with you too. Okay, if I don't have any more volunteers, that's all I've got. So I'm just here for questions or comments or anything that you want to ask about.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of the day, Dr. Rambo. We really appreciate it. And
thank you. I enjoyed talking with you all.
We have a lot
thank you to my people that talk for the groups. I appreciate that.
We have a lot of students who will be watching this recording and reviewing it, but sharing your insights today and your professional background, it really was insightful.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody that would like to hear more about this or learn more about this, I will put in the chat my email. And anybody who's interested in careers and family therapy, we have a great book, Doing Well While Doing Good, which is on Amazon with me and several of our other faculty. Okay, thank you guys. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Students, thanks for joining us. You guys, everyone, have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Jesse.